Section 3 of Stanton White, A Romance of the New South, by Asa Zadel Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3, Recaptured. I awoke to find that the porter had been trying vainly to arouse me for some time. It was after 8 o'clock, and I looked from my car window upon the mountains of Virginia, glinted here and there by dew-laden herb and bush, and flecked by patches of sunlight. I was ordering a hearty breakfast when I chanced to remember my companion of the former night. I had given him no money with which to purchase food. Starting to find him, I learned to my dismay that the Jim Crow car had been detached during the night as the train began to ascend some heavy grades, and that the car would follow by a slower train. At first I was much exercised over the separation from my ward, but my breakfast was waiting, and my stiffened muscles courted the ease of the soft cushions. I yielded to the bodily indulgence, while my anxiety decreased in proportion as my bodily comfort increased. By the time breakfast was over, I began to take quite a complacent view of the whole matter. Oh well, I thought. He's so accustomed to shifting for himself that it will not be much of a hardship to be thrown on his own resources in a strange city. As for a little privation, he will not know the difference 100 years from now. I've gotten him safely away from his pursuers. I've even risked my own life and comfort in so doing. Indeed, I may have offended my father's boyhood friend, Mr. Edson, at whose invitation I was to have spent my Christmas vacation in his Florida home. But had I the assurance that my ward was entirely out of danger? I had left him unarmed, penniless, wounded, in a crowded, dirty car. Here I must have dozed, for the next I knew, the waiter was tapping me on the shoulder and wishing to know what I'd have for lunch. Once I thought of getting off the train and awaiting the arrival of the Jim Crow car, but I realized that this would mean delay and financial loss for me. Accordingly, I decided to look for him after I arrived in Philadelphia. But there, amid the many trains and throngs of people, I soon lost hope of discovering him. Arrived at college, I watched the papers for a few days, but saw no notice of his recapture. Then I dismissed the subject entirely from my mind. The school year sped uneventfully. I did not distinguish myself greatly in my studies. What was the use of grinding when so many pleasures were available? I wrote a lengthy letter to Mr. Edson, explaining fully my strange vacation experience, and begging him to pardon the suspense and anxiety I must have caused him, by allowing myself to be diverted from my long-cherished purpose. Receiving no reply, I concluded that I had offended either by a bungling expression of regret or by the seeming slight to my would-be host's hospitality. I began to almost wish that I had turned a deaf ear to the roustabout's entreaties. He, a stranger, had no right to expect me to give up my plans in order to lend him assistance. I did not know even his name. I was not usually in so generous a mood, and that I had been willing to thaw so easily was a cause for much wonder on my part. But even as I reproached myself for what seemed like foolish gullibility, the picture of the lone, hunted, desperate, yet manly fellow whom I had aided came to mind. I remembered how he had pleaded with me to leave him and save myself, and how uncomplainingly he had borne his hardships and even his wounds. Ashamed of my selfishness in harboring anything but the most generous feeling, I repeatedly put the whole subject from my thoughts, and so far succeeded in dismissing it from my mind, that as the spring with its outdoor sports and its promise of a summer's rest drew on, I found the circumstances of the last vacation taking on an element of unreality. The end of the school year was fast approaching, when I was surprised one day to receive a letter from Mr. Edson. It was seemingly prompted by the kindliest feeling. He regretted my failure to visit him, and hinted delicately that he had not been without concern for my safety. He most cordially and hospitably renewed his invitation to me to visit him whenever my convenience might dictate. Then followed a section which greatly excited me. It read, "I am glad that if it were necessary for me to be denied the pleasure of a visit from you, it was for no less commendable a service than that which you undertook. My only regret is that, like too many other good works, this service did not go quite far enough to accomplish its object." I was watching the papers with some anxiety to discover, if possible, a cause for your delay in coming. The papers were full of accounts of this runaway Negro. I followed the account of the burned public buildings and the escape of the suspected incendiary, as well as a long, drawn-out description of the part played by the unknown villain from the North. The next day they reported no progress in the case, but the following day the papers blazed with headlines telling of the Negro's recapture. It seemed that he was caught on board a northbound train. Detectives employed by Seeger, the overseer, identified him by his clothes, but they had no opportunity to even notify their employer. The arrest caused sufficient commotion to attract a crowd, and then it was all up with the Negro. No chance for escape this time. In vain he protested his innocence, claiming that he was the victim of some horrible mistake. They hurried him to a neighboring pile of neglected railroad ties, and there they roasted him alive. While he writhed and screamed in agony, his executioners looked placidly on. As his limbs began to char, and the fire abated slightly, eager souvenir hunters slashed off pieces of fingers and toes, while others contented themselves with links of the chain which held him to the funeral pyre. Seeger was the only one not satisfied with the procedure. He expressed the opinion that the nigger was too slippery by a D-blank sight to be caught and executed without a struggle. He refused to pay the detectives for the capture, and gave it out as his intention to travel from ocean to ocean and from pole to pole until he was assured of the right nigger's death. That I was profoundly impressed as well as surprised by the contents of this letter need not be said. I now saw clearly how lax I had been in carrying out what I had recognized as a duty. How different might have been the outcome if I had but used a little precaution. Just a little carelessness had rendered unavailing all my good intentions and danger-fraught comradeship. To some extent, I felt blood-guilty. Calmer reflection told me that I was not altogether at fault. I assured myself that if this unhappy experience only taught me greater care in the performance of known duty, I should not feel poorly repaid. End of Section 3. Recorded by James K. White, Chula Vista.